My son Nathan called me on a Tuesday morning, and the nervousness in his voice told me everything before he said a single word. He asked me to dress nicely for Saturday. Not just nicely, he used the word presentably. At 63 years old, my own son asked me to be presentable. What he didn't know, what I'd never told him, was that his future wife's father had been writing me a check every single month for the past 4 years. Not out of generosity, out of obligation. Because I owned the building where the Hargrove family built their entire empire. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened first. Before I tell you who I really am, I want to ask you something. What city are you listening from? And have you ever had someone look right through you, like you were invisible, like your whole life amounted to nothing worth noticing? I have. And I want you to know it's the best gift they ever gave me. My alarm doesn't go off at a set time anymore. That's one of the luxuries of retirement, or what everyone assumes is retirement. I wake when the light comes through the blinds of my apartment in East Charlotte, a neighborhood that politely describes itself as up and coming. The linoleum in my kitchen has been peeling at the corner for 2 years. My sofa came from an estate sale. My television is the same one Nathan bought me 6 Christmases ago, back when he was still a junior associate and could only afford a 32-inch screen. I kept it because it works fine. I keep most things because they work fine. What my neighbors see when they look at me is a quiet, older man who drives a 9-year-old Buick, wears canvas shoes, and buys his coffee from the gas station on Tryon Street. What they don't see is the direct deposit that lands in my account on the first of every month. $412,000 quarterly. Rental income from 14 commercial properties across North Carolina and South Carolina. I built Malone Property Holdings from nothing over 30 years, starting with a single strip mall in Gastonia that everyone said was a bad investment. Now I own the kind of real estate that other people's businesses depend on to survive. Nathan doesn't know any of this. That was a choice I made deliberately, and I stand by it even now. He called at 8:15, and I could hear him measuring his words before he spoke each one. Dad, Cassie's parents are coming in from Raleigh this weekend. They want to do a dinner. All of us together. A pause. At Meridian. Meridian was the kind of steakhouse in uptown Charlotte where surgeons proposed to their girlfriends and law partners celebrated settlements. I'd attended 2 business dinners there myself, though I'd never mentioned that to Nathan. That sounds fine, I told him. He exhaled. Then, just, wear something good. Her family is pretty traditional. Her dad owns Hargrove Home Furnishings. 6 stores now. Another pause. They're successful people, Dad. Successful people. My son was warning me that the people I was about to meet had achieved things, as if I hadn't built the floor they were standing on. I set down my gas station coffee and looked at my apartment. The worn armchair I'd reupholstered myself. The stack of legal documents on my kitchen table that would make most people's eyes water. The modest, deliberate life I'd chosen because I grew up watching my father work himself to nothing, trying to look like he had more than he did. My father was a proud man who died broke because he spent 30 years performing wealth instead of building it. I promised myself I would never do the same. So when the money came, I kept it quiet. I put it back into properties and let the properties grow. And I raised my son to understand that a man's worth was in his character, not his zip code. Now my son was nervous about me meeting people who owned 6 furniture stores. I gave myself 4 days to prepare. That Wednesday, I pulled up everything I could find on the Hargrove family online. Gerald Hargrove, 61, had founded Hargrove Home Furnishings in 1998 with a single showroom in North Hills, Raleigh. His wife Diane managed marketing and social media. 6 locations now, scattered across the Research Triangle in Charlotte. Their website used words like curated and elevated living no fewer than 11 times on the homepage. A lifestyle magazine profile from 2 years ago described Gerald as a self-made entrepreneur with an eye for design and a passion for community. The same article mentioned that the Hargroves had recently joined a private golf club in Cary and were renovating their second home in the Outer Banks. Self-made. I smiled at that. Every person who calls themselves self-made forgets the landlord. I knew the Hargrove name. I hadn't connected it to Cassie until Nathan mentioned it on the phone, but as soon as I started digging, I found it immediately in my own records. Hargrove Home Furnishings, Charlotte flagship location. 9,400 square feet of ground floor retail In a mixed-use development on South Boulevard that I'd purchased in 2019, Gerald Hargrove had signed a 5-year commercial lease. He paid Malone Property Holdings $11,400 every single month. His lease came up for renewal in 8 months. He had no idea the landlord he'd never met was his daughter's future father-in-law. Thursday, I went to my storage unit. In the back, behind a box of Nathan's childhood baseball trophies and my late wife's sewing machine, I found what I was looking for. Old work clothes from before the money. A flannel shirt in faded green, soft from 100 washings, with a small stain at the cuff that no amount of pre-treating had ever fully removed. A pair of dark trousers with a worn patch at the right knee. Brown leather shoes that had been resoled twice and now just looked tired. I laid them on my bed and stepped back. The man in those clothes was the man Gerald Hargrove expected to meet on Saturday. I had no interest in correcting that expectation early. Friday afternoon, Nathan called again to confirm the time. His voice was doing that thing it did when he was managing multiple anxieties at once, clipped, efficient, trying to sound casual. 6:30. Meridian. They're making a reservation. A beat. Dad, just be yourself, okay? They're good people. I think you'll like them. I told him I was sure I would. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and thought about my son. Nathan was 34 years old, a structural engineer at a firm downtown, a genuinely good man who had grown up watching me live simply and had assumed, naturally, that simple was all there was. I'd never corrected him. That was my failure, perhaps. Or perhaps it was my greatest success. He'd chosen Cassie because he loved her, not because of her family's furniture stores. He'd built his career on his own. He'd never once asked me for money because he'd never known there was any to ask for. But somewhere along the way, my son had started seeing himself through other people's eyes, and that worried me more than anything Gerald Hargrove might say at dinner. Saturday came gray and cool, the kind of October afternoon that smells like rain that hasn't decided to fall yet. I dressed slowly, deliberately. The flannel shirt, the worn trousers, the tired shoes. I looked in the bathroom mirror for a long moment. A man who'd worked hard and arrived at old age with just enough. That's what the mirror showed. That's what I wanted it to show. I reached into my sock drawer and found my wallet. I carried 2 cards. One was a standard debit card linked to a modest checking account I used for daily expenses. The other was matte black, with my name in raised silver letters, a corporate card connected to Malone Property Holdings with no preset spending limit. I put both in my wallet and drove downtown. Meridian occupied the ground floor of a glass tower on College Street. Valets in black jackets handled a steady stream of German sedans and SUVs. I pulled into the self-park garage 2 blocks away and walked. The hostess stand was all dark walnut and warm light. A woman in a fitted blazer smiled at me in the way that people who work in expensive places learn to smile, inclusive enough to be professional, just cool enough to communicate that not everyone belongs here. Crawford party? I asked, using the name Nathan had made the reservation under. She checked her screen and her smile warmed slightly. Of course, your party is already seated. Right this way. I saw Nathan first. He was standing near the table, not seated, standing, watching the entrance, which told me he'd been watching for me for a while. When he spotted me, something moved across his face that I recognized as relief mixed with something more complicated. He'd been worried about what I would look like. And now he was looking at the flannel shirt and the worn shoes and recalibrating his worry into something closer to resignation. He crossed the room to meet me, and I hugged him before he could say anything. "Hey, Dad." His voice was quiet. "You look." He stopped. "I'm glad you're here." Cassie stood beside him, a pretty woman with her mother's precise posture and her father's watchful eyes. She smiled at me with genuine warmth. Whatever her parents were, I could see that she actually loved my son. I held on to that. Gerald and Diane Hargrove were already seated. Gerald was a trim man with silver-streaked hair cut close, wearing a jacket that had that particular understated quality that expensive things often have: no logos, no flash, just an impeccable fit that told you everything you needed to know. He stood when I approached, which I appreciated. His handshake was the handshake of a man who'd learned, somewhere along the way, that a firm grip communicates authority. "Richard," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like he was placing it into a category. Gerald Hargrove. Great to finally put a face to the name. Diane remained seated. Her smile was the kind that takes a lot of practice to make look natural. She was dressed in a deep burgundy blouse with a simple gold necklace. The kind of woman who had figured out exactly how much jewelry was appropriate for every occasion and never deviated. Cassie has told us so much about Nathan, Diane said. He seems like a truly remarkable young man. He is, I said. I meant it completely. We sat. I ended up in the chair with my back to the room, the one that wobbled imperceptibly on the uneven floor. Gerald had the window seat overlooking the street below. Within 30 seconds of sitting down, I understood the geography of this table. The menus came. No prices on the entrees, which meant the kind of pricing that assumes if you have to ask, you've already made an error by being here. Gerald studied the wine list with the focused attention of a man who wanted you to notice he was studying the wine list. They have a 2019 Staglin here, he said, mostly to Diane. That's worth celebrating. He ordered a bottle without asking what anyone else might prefer. Diane chose a separate glass of something she described to the sommelier using words I recognized from contracts but had never used at a dinner table. Just water for me, I told the server. Thank you. The silence that followed was brief but complete. Gerald set his menu down and looked at me with the particular expression of a man who has already formed his opinion and is now simply gathering evidence to support it. So, Richard, Nathan tells us you're retired. That's right. What was your field? He asked this the way people ask the question when they already expect an answer that won't interest them. Property, I said. Oh? A polite uptick? Real estate? In a manner of speaking. Maintenance, mostly. Keeping things running. He nodded the nod of a man filing information under not relevant. Diane was cutting her bread with the focused attention of someone who had decided the conversation had already concluded. Cassie glanced at Nathan, and Nathan glanced at his water glass. We've been in business since '98, Gerald said, pivoting naturally to more interesting territory. Started with one showroom. Took 15 years to get to 3 locations, and then once we cracked the formula, the next 3 came quickly. He smiled. There was genuine pride in it, and I respected that. Building something from scratch is real work, regardless of what you build. 6 locations now. We're looking at a 7th in Greensboro if the market cooperates. That's impressive, I said. I was not performing. I meant it. The secret, Gerald continued, forming to the topic the way people do when they find themselves explaining something they love, is knowing your customer. Our customer is someone who has worked hard, wants beautiful things in their home, and doesn't want to feel like they're settling. That customer will pay for quality if you make them feel understood. Makes sense, I said. Same principle applies to a lot of things. Exactly. He pointed at me with his bread knife, which I had a feeling was a habit he wasn't aware of. You either understand your market or you don't. Most people don't. Diane set down her bread. Nathan tells us you live in East Charlotte, Richard. A careful pause. We actually have a location not far from there. The South Boulevard store. One of our best performing. Is that right? I said. The neighborhood has come a long way, she continued. 10 years ago, we wouldn't have considered it. But the demographics have shifted considerably. She said demographics the way people say it when they mean something else. Gerald took a real risk on that location. It's paid off. He's always had a good eye, Cassie said loyally, reaching across to touch her father's arm. It helps when you own the building, Gerald said. Then he looked at me and must have heard what he'd just said, because he added quickly, or when you have a good lease arrangement, which we do. He would not know, until later, exactly how good. The appetizers arrived. Diane had ordered for the table without asking tuna crudo, a mushroom preparation on toast, shrimp presented in a way that made them look like they were surprised to be there. I ate without comment. The food was genuinely excellent. Tell me something, Gerald said, leaning back in his chair in the way people lean back when they're about to say something they've been holding. Nathan grew up you raised him largely on your own. After forgive me, Cassie mentioned you lost your wife some years back. Eleanor passed 11 years ago, I said. I'm sorry. He said it and meant it. I could tell. There are condolences and there are condolences. That's a hard thing to carry. Raising a son alone, on a single income, in this economy. We managed. You did more than manage, Nathan said quietly. And I looked at my son and felt something I hadn't expected to feel at this table, which was gratitude. He was watching me with an expression I hadn't seen on his face in years. I gave him a small nod. Still, Diane said, it must have been a constant worry. Finances, healthcare, all of it. She arranged her fork alongside her plate with the precision of a woman accustomed to having things arranged. I imagine retirement brings its own set of pressures. I don't have much to worry about, I said honestly. She smiled, the smile of someone who has decided that a person in worn shoes saying they don't have much to worry about is the most heartbreaking kind of denial. Of course. One adjusts. She glanced at Gerald, and this was when it happened. This was the moment I had been watching for, the moment that every dinner like this eventually produces, when the performance of generosity becomes indistinguishable from condescension. Gerald reached into his jacket. He produced a white envelope, the kind that comes from a box of 50 at an office supply store. He set it on the table between us, not beside his plate, between us, deliberately. The sommelier paused in his circuit of the dining room. The couple at the next table, who had been engaged in quiet conversation, went slightly still in that particular way that people go still when they sense a scene developing. "Richard," Gerald said. His voice had the low, carrying quality of a man accustomed to rooms turning toward him. "Diane and I talked about this before we came tonight. We want to be the kind of family that takes care of each other." He touched the envelope. "This is for you. A gesture of welcome, to help with whatever you need, medical expenses, home repairs, whatever comes up. We don't want Nathan carrying that concern into his marriage." The number he named was $15,000. The table was very quiet. $15,000, said out loud, in a restaurant, placed in an envelope between us like a settlement. The woman at the next table had stopped chewing. A waiter who'd been approaching with a water pitcher slowed to a halt 10 feet away. Nathan's jaw had tightened until I could see it working. "Dad," Cassie said quietly, her voice carrying a different kind of concern than her father's. "We love Nathan," Diane said, her voice precisely warm, "and we want him to be able to focus on building his life with Cassie without feeling pulled in two directions. This is just, it's practical. A burden," I said quietly. Diane blinked. "I didn't say that." "No," I agreed. "You were too polite to say it." Nathan pushed his chair back from the table slightly. "Mr. Hargrove, my father doesn't need—" "Son," I put my hand on Nathan's arm. "It's all right." I looked at the envelope for a moment, then I looked at Gerald. "That's a very generous offer. I appreciate the thought behind it." Gerald's shoulders relaxed slightly. Diane smiled. Nathan looked at me with an expression that said he was not all right with any of this, and I gave his arm a slight pressure that I hoped communicated, "Wait, but I can't accept it," I said. "Richard, I'm not in a position where I need it." Gerald tilted his head the way a man does when he's heard something that doesn't fit into his working model of the world. "There's no shame in accepting help. That's what family does." "I agree completely," I said. "And I'll tell you what. Let me get dinner tonight, and we'll call it even." A polite laugh from Gerald. The kind that means, "That's sweet." He reached for the check presenter that the server had quietly placed at the edge of the table during the envelope exchange. "Absolutely not. This is on us. Consider it a welcome." He opened the presenter with the ease of a man who has picked up many checks. His eyes went to the total. I caught it from across the table, $2,340. He selected a card from his wallet. The card went into the presenter. The server carried it to the terminal. Gerald was already pivoting back to the conversation, saying something to Diane about the Greensboro location. The server returned. His expression had shifted in the small, careful way that service professionals shift when they're delivering uncomfortable news. "Mr. Hargrove, I'm sorry this card has been declined." Gerald's head turned slowly. "That's not possible." "I can try it again, sir." "Please do." The card went back. The terminal spoke. The server returned again, and this time the table had gone the kind of quiet that means everyone is pretending not to listen to something they are listening to very carefully. The couple at the adjacent table had given up any pretense. "I'm very sorry, sir. It's not going through." Gerald was already opening his wallet, pulling out a second card. His jaw had taken on a particular set. "This one. Run this one." Diane was leaning toward him. "Gerald, check your phone. The bank flagged something last month." "I know, Diane." The second card came back, declined. A third card produced the same result. Gerald's face had moved through several stages and arrived somewhere between anger and acute embarrassment. He was scrolling his phone with the intensity of a man searching for an explanation that would restore the natural order of things. "Perhaps there's a fraud alert," Cassie said quietly, touching her father's sleeve. "Of course there's a fraud alert," Gerald said. "There's always a fraud alert when you need." He stopped, looked at the table, looked at me, and I reached into my wallet, past the debit card, past the white space where Gerald's envelope still sat between us, unclaimed. I withdrew the other card, matte black, no logo. My name in raised silver, Richard Malone. "Allow me," I said. I handed it to the server. The server looked at the card and something shifted in his posture. The almost imperceptible recalibration that happens when someone recognizes a thing they don't see often. "Of course, Mr. Malone. Right away." It cleared in 4 seconds. The server brought back the presenter with a quiet professionalism that told me he understood exactly what kind of moment this was. "Thank you, Mr. Malone. Is there anything else I can bring your table this evening?" "We're all set," I said. "Thank you." Gerald Hargrove sat across from me with an expression I recognized. I had worn it once, years ago, when a deal I was certain of dissolved in front of me in a conference room. It was the expression of a man reorganizing his understanding of his own position in a room. "Richard," he said finally. "That card." "My name is Richard Malone," I said. I kept my voice easy, no performance in it. I spent 30 years building Malone Property Holdings. We manage commercial real estate across 14 properties in the Carolinas. I paused. Your South Boulevard location is one of ours. You've been a tenant since 2019. $11,400 a month. You're a good tenant, Gerald. I want you to know that. You've never been late. The table was completely still, not the polite stillness of before. The other kind. Diane's hand had stopped moving. Cassie was looking between her parents and me with an expression caught somewhere between shock and something that might have been relief. Nathan, my son, was watching me with wide eyes, and then he did something that I will carry with me for the rest of my life. He laughed. Not meanly, not at his future in-laws. He laughed the way people laugh when a truth they should have known all along finally surfaces, and it's bigger and better than they'd imagined. He reached over and put his hand on my shoulder, and he left it there. "Dad," he said. "How long?" "Long enough." Gerald cleared his throat. He looked at the black card on the table. He looked at me. I had no idea. "I know," I said. "Peter Richard. We never would have," Diane began. "I know that too," I said. And I did. That was the most useful thing I had learned over 30 years in business. People rarely intend to be cruel. They intend to be comfortable. And cruelty is a byproduct of comfort. Gerald and Diane hadn't placed that envelope on the table to hurt me. They'd placed it there to preserve a world in which they were the kind of people who helped those less fortunate. A world that required someone to be less fortunate in order to function. "But here's what I want you to understand," I said. I wasn't angry. I want to be clear about that. The anger had been real when I'd watched Diane's eyes move over my flannel shirt and make their calculation, when Gerald had set that envelope on the table with enough volume for half the restaurant to register. But that anger had done its work, and now there was something cleaner on the other side of it. The man in this shirt, the man who drives a 9-year-old Buick and buys his coffee at a gas station, that man was real. That's who I come from. My father was a factory worker in Greensboro. My mother cleaned houses on weekends so I could play Little League. Every dollar I have came from understanding the value of what other people built and making sure the buildings that held their work were worth something. I looked at Gerald steadily. "You didn't build your stores. You built what went inside them. I built what holds them up. Neither of us is better for that. But neither of us should hand the other an envelope across a dinner table like there's someone who needs to be managed." Gerald set his hands flat on the table, the gesture of a man deciding to be honest. "You're right," he said. "Just that. You're right. I'm sorry, Richard." Diane looked at her hands for a long moment. When she looked up, something in her face had rearranged itself into something more genuine. "I owe you an apology as well." That was the envelope was. "Meant kindly," I offered. "I know." Cassie looked at Nathan. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, and I understood she wasn't only apologizing for the dinner. Nathan covered her hand with his. My dad taught me something, Nathan said. His voice had steadied into something quiet and sure that I recognized as his real voice, the one underneath the one he'd been using all evening. He taught me that the most important things about a person are usually invisible, and that the people worth knowing are the ones who treat you the same whether they think you have something to offer them or not. He looked at Gerald. I hope that's the kind of family we're going to be. Gerald held Nathan's gaze for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, slowly, the nod of a man acknowledging something he'd needed to hear. It is, he said. We sat for another 20 minutes. The dessert menu came and went. Gerald ordered coffee and told a story about his first store that didn't have the gloss of the earlier version. A smaller, truer story about the months when he wasn't sure it would work, when Diane was working 2 jobs and their daughter was too young to understand why they ate sandwiches for dinner more nights than not. It was a better story than the one about the 2019 Staglin. I told him I'd started with a strip mall in Gastonia that had 3 vacant units when I bought it, and that my father had told me I was making a mistake. Gerald smiled at that. We smiled at the same time, about the same thing, which is a different kind of meeting than the one we'd had at 6:30. Nathan walked me to the parking garage afterward, just the 2 of us, the city moving around us in its ordinary weekend way. Why didn't you tell me? He asked. Because I needed you to become who you are without the weight of it. I looked at my son, 34 years old, the kind of man who, when things got hard, put his hand on his father's shoulder and left it there. Money changes how people think about themselves, Nathan. It changes what they think they deserve. I watched it happen to people my whole career. I didn't want it to happen to you. It's a lot to carry alone. It wasn't a burden, I said. It was a choice. I paused. The burden was watching you be ashamed of me at that table. He stopped walking. Dad, it's okay. I understand it. You're human. You wanted me to fit. I turned to face him. But you don't need to fit me anywhere. I'm not something that needs to fit. He was quiet for a moment. Then the envelope. Were you angry? Yes. What would you have done if the cards hadn't declined? I considered this honestly. I would have paid for dinner anyway. Told them everything anyway. I smiled. But the cards declining was God having a sense of humor. I wasn't going to argue with that. Nathan laughed. Really laughed, for the 2nd time that night. And it sounded like himself. You're going to marry a good woman, I told him. Cassie loves you. I watched her at that table. She was embarrassed by her parents, not by you. That matters. I put my hand on his arm. The Hargroves are not bad people. They're people who've lived inside their own success long enough to forget that the world is bigger than they can see from in there. Most of us do that, given enough time. It's curable. He nodded. We stood in the garage under the buzzing lights, father and son on a Saturday night in Charlotte, with everything reordered between us. Will you tell me about it sometime? Nathan asked. The properties, the business, all of it? I'd like that very much, I said. I drove home through the city. The Buick ran the same as it always does, steady and unimpressive, carrying me without complaint. I thought about my father working the factory floor in Greensboro, the smell of machine oil on his hands, the way he'd saved for 6 months to take my mother to a restaurant that had cloth napkins. I thought about the strip mall in Gastonia and the 4 vacant units that became 12 occupied ones and the 12 that became 14 properties and the life that grew in the space between those numbers. I thought about Nathan's hand on my shoulder. I don't need a car that announces itself. I don't need an address that communicates my net worth before I've opened my mouth. I need the coffee that works, the furniture that holds, the clothes that cover me well enough for any weather. I need to know, when someone looks at me and makes their calculation, whether they see the shirt or the man inside it. Most people see the shirt. That's fine. The shirt has done its job faithfully for 30 years. The man inside it has no complaints. The Hargrove lease comes up in 8 months. I intend to renew it at fair market rate. Gerald is a good tenant, and good tenants are worth more than any one dinner. What I hope he carries out of that restaurant is simpler than any lease term. I hope he carries the memory of that envelope on the table, and lets it teach him what my father's factory floor taught me, that dignity doesn't require an announcement. It only requires that you give it freely to every person in the room, whether you think they can offer you anything or not. That's the only currency I've ever found that doesn't depreciate. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever been judged before someone knew your story? Have you ever had to decide between correcting someone's assumption and letting it teach you something? Tell me. I read every one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this today, pass it along. Sometimes the right words find the right person at exactly the right moment. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this one. I'll see you in the next one.